I stood at my husband's funeral watching them lower his coffin when his mother leaned close and whispered, "You were never his real wife." She pointed to a woman standing behind the flowers. The lawyer opened a second envelope and read a name that made everyone gasp. Before we start, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories. My name is Margaret Anderson, and I am 67 years old. If you had asked anyone in our small Pennsylvania town about me, they would have told you I was the kind of woman who held families together. For 42 years, I devoted every ounce of my energy to my husband, Robert, and everyone connected to him. I wasn't just a wife. I was a mother, a daughter-in-law, a grandmother, a caretaker, and the steady heartbeat of our family. I raised our 3 beautiful children mostly on my own while Robert built his accounting career. When our son David scraped his knee learning to ride a bike, I was there with bandages and kisses. When our daughter Jennifer needed help with college applications, I stayed up until midnight proofreading every essay. When our youngest, Michael, went through his difficult teenage years, I was the one who sat with him through the tears and the anger, never giving up on him. But my sacrifices went far beyond my own children. When Robert's father suffered a stroke 15 years ago, I moved him into our home and cared for him for 3 years until he passed. I changed his clothes, fed him, bathed him, and made sure he maintained his dignity, even when he could no longer speak. When Robert's mother, Eleanor, needed surgery on her hip, I was at the hospital every single day, bringing her favorite foods and reading to her during recovery. I was the woman who baked 7 pies every Thanksgiving because everyone in the extended family had their favorite. I was the one who organized every birthday party, every anniversary celebration, every holiday gathering. Our home was always filled with warmth and laughter because I made it that way. I volunteered at St. Michael's Church every Sunday, helping with the food pantry and organizing fundraisers for families in need. The community knew me as someone they could count on. People in town would see me at the grocery store and smile, telling me how lucky Robert was to have such a devoted wife. Neighbors would comment on how beautiful our garden looked, not knowing I spent hours on my knees in the dirt making it perfect. I ironed Robert's shirts every single morning for 4 decades, made his coffee exactly the way he liked it, and packed his lunch with little notes tucked inside telling him I loved him. I gave up my own dreams of becoming a teacher because Robert needed me to work 2 jobs to put him through graduate school. I never complained. I thought that was what love looked like. Complete selflessness, total devotion, endless sacrifice. I believed that if I loved hard enough, gave enough, and asked for nothing in return, I would build something beautiful and unbreakable. I was wrong. The life I thought I had built was constructed on lies, and the family I thought loved me had been planning my destruction for years. I just didn't know it yet. Life with Robert felt like a gentle rhythm I had perfected over 4 decades of marriage. It was comfortable, predictable, and exactly what I thought a good life should look like. Every morning, my alarm would go off at 6 o'clock sharp. I would slip out of bed quietly, careful not to wake Robert, and pad downstairs to start the coffee maker. The sound of it brewing was like a morning song that marked the beginning of another day in our routine. By the time Robert came down at 6:30, his coffee would be waiting. 2 sugars and a splash of cream, served in the blue mug his daughter Jennifer had given him for Father's Day 10 years ago. We would sit together at our oak kitchen table, the one we had bought when we first moved into this house in 1985. I would read the local section of the newspaper while Robert focused on the business pages. Occasionally, he would share something interesting about the stock market or a local company, and I would tell him about upcoming church events or town happenings. Our conversations were simple and easy. We talked about whether the lawn needed mowing, what to have for dinner, or when we should schedule our next visit to see the grandchildren. There was no drama, no tension, just the comfortable silence of 2 people who had spent most of their lives together. I found peace in that silence. I thought it meant we had reached that enviable stage of marriage where words were no longer necessary because we understood each other so completely. Robert would leave for work at his accounting firm downtown at 7:30 every morning. I would kiss him goodbye at the door and watch him back out of the driveway in his silver Honda Accord. Then I would begin my day: laundry, cleaning, gardening, preparing dinner. On Tuesdays, I volunteered at the church food pantry. On Thursdays, I had my book club with the ladies from the neighborhood. On Saturdays, Robert and I would run errands together, stopping at the hardware store or the garden center, moving through our tasks like a well-rehearsed dance. Sundays were sacred in our family. After church, we would drive to Eleanor's house about 20 minutes away. I always brought groceries because Eleanor was getting older, and I worried about her managing on her own. I would prepare Sunday dinner in her kitchen: roast chicken or pot roast, mashed potatoes, green beans, homemade rolls. Eleanor would sit at the table giving me instructions on how she preferred things done, even though I had been cooking these same meals for decades. I never complained. She was Robert's mother, and making her happy made Robert happy, which made me happy. Our children called regularly from their different cities. David was a lawyer in Chicago, Jennifer worked in marketing in Boston, and Michael taught high school in Seattle. They had their own busy lives, their own families, but we stayed connected through weekly phone calls and video chats with the grandchildren. I would tell Robert how proud I was of the family we had built together, how our children had turned out so well because we had given them a stable, loving home. Everything seemed perfectly in place. I had no idea I was living in a beautifully decorated prison and the walls were about to come crashing down. 3 months before Robert died, I noticed something odd. It started small, so small that I almost missed it completely. Robert began receiving phone calls at strange times, during dinner, late in the evening, even early on Sunday mornings. Whenever his phone rang, he would glance at the screen with an expression I couldn't quite read, then quickly excuse himself. He would walk out to the garage or slip into the backyard, speaking in hushed tones that I could barely hear through the windows. The first time it happened, I thought nothing of it. Robert was an accountant and tax season could be demanding. Clients sometimes had emergencies or last-minute questions that couldn't wait. But as the calls became more frequent, a small seed of doubt planted itself in my mind. When I casually asked who had called, Robert would wave his hand dismissively and say, "Oh, just work stuff, nothing important." His tone was light, but he wouldn't meet my eyes when he said it. Then there were the flowers. Beautiful, expensive arrangements started arriving at our house every few weeks. The first time, I was delighted. I assumed Robert had ordered them as a romantic surprise, a sweet gesture after so many years of marriage. But when I thanked him, he looked genuinely confused for a moment before quickly recovering. "Oh, those. Yes, they're from a grateful client. Big account I helped them with." It seemed reasonable enough, but something about his explanation felt rehearsed, like he had prepared the answer before I even asked the question. I called the florist once, curious about which client was so generous. The woman on the phone sounded puzzled. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but I don't see any business account associated with these orders. They were paid for with a personal credit card." When I pressed for more details, she apologized and said she couldn't share customer information. I hung up feeling uneasy but told myself I was being paranoid. The breaking point came when I was going through Robert's jacket pockets before taking it to the dry cleaner. I always checked pockets carefully after he once left an important check tucked away that nearly went through the wash. My fingers brushed against a folded piece of paper, and I pulled out a restaurant receipt. It was from Giovanni's, an upscale Italian restaurant across town that we had never visited together. The date on the receipt made my stomach drop. It was from our anniversary 3 weeks ago. That night, I had cooked Robert's favorite meal at home, pot roast with all the fixings, because he had told me he was too exhausted from work to go out. He had seemed genuinely tired, kissing my cheek and saying, "Maybe next year we'll do something special. Tonight, I just want to be home with you." I had believed him. I had felt loved and appreciated for understanding his needs. But this receipt told a different story. He had been at Giovanni's on our anniversary, spending nearly $200 on dinner and wine. If he wasn't with me, then who was he with? My hands trembled as I stared at the faded ink. A voice in the back of my mind whispered that something was very, very wrong, but I wasn't ready to listen. Not yet. I stood in our laundry room holding that restaurant receipt for what felt like an eternity, my mind racing through 1,000 possible explanations. Maybe it was a business dinner. Maybe Robert had taken an important client out on our anniversary and felt embarrassed to admit it because he knew I would be disappointed. Maybe the receipt was from a different day, and he had simply grabbed the wrong jacket. There had to be a logical explanation that didn't involve betrayal. I carefully folded the receipt and tucked it into my pocket, deciding not to confront Robert about it. What would I even say? That I was suspicious because of a piece of paper and some phone calls? After 42 years of marriage, didn't he deserve the benefit of the doubt? Accusing him of something terrible based on such flimsy evidence felt like a betrayal in itself, as if I was the one breaking our trust by even entertaining such dark thoughts. That night at dinner, I watched Robert carefully. He seemed completely normal, talking about a difficult client at work and asking about my day at the church food pantry. He laughed at something I said about Mrs. Henderson's gossipy tendencies, and the sound was warm and familiar. This was my husband, the man I had built a life with, the father of my children. How could I suspect him of living a double life? The very idea seemed absurd, like something from a television drama, not from my quiet, predictable existence. I told myself I was being a foolish old woman letting my imagination run wild. Perhaps this was what happened when you reached a certain age and your children had moved away. Too much time alone led to overthinking, to creating problems where none existed. I had read articles about women who became paranoid and jealous in their later years, driving away devoted husbands with baseless accusations. I refused to become that woman. Over the following weeks, I threw myself into my routines with renewed energy, as if staying busy could silence the doubts whispering in the corners of my mind. I deep cleaned every room in the house, organized closets that didn't need organizing, and volunteered for extra shifts at the church. I baked elaborate desserts and prepared Robert's favorite meals, determined to be the perfect wife I had always been. If I just loved him harder, served him better, the nagging suspicions would disappear. When Robert took another mysterious call and disappeared into the garage, I forced myself to focus on folding laundry. When more flowers arrived with no card, I arranged them beautifully in a vase and convinced myself they truly were from grateful clients. When I noticed unfamiliar charges on our credit card statement, I told myself Robert must have taken colleagues out for lunch and forgotten to mention it. Every time doubt crept in, I pushed it away with practiced determination. I was 67 years old, not some insecure young bride worried about competition. Robert and I had weathered decades together, survived the stress of raising children, nursed aging parents, and built something solid and real. Surely that counted for something. Surely my instincts were wrong. But deep down, in a place I refused to acknowledge, I knew the truth was waiting for me. I just wasn't ready to face it yet. 2 weeks before Robert's heart attack, I was cleaning out his car in preparation for our grandson's visit. Michael was bringing little Tyler to stay with us for the weekend, and I wanted everything to be perfect. Robert's Honda Accord had become cluttered with old coffee cups, gas station receipts, and various papers scattered across the dashboard and floor mats. I grabbed a trash bag and started working my way through the mess, humming softly to myself as I cleaned. I was reaching under the passenger seat to retrieve what I thought was a crumpled napkin when my fingers brushed against something small and hard. I pulled it out and found myself staring at a velvet jewelry box, the kind that holds something expensive and meaningful. My heart began to pound. For a brief, wonderful moment, I thought perhaps Robert had bought me a surprise gift, something special he was planning to give me for an upcoming occasion. With trembling hands, I opened the box. Inside was a delicate gold bracelet, beautiful and clearly expensive, with tiny diamonds catching the afternoon sunlight. But as I lifted it to examine it closer, I saw the engraving on the inside of the band, R and L forever. The letters seemed to burn into my vision. R for Robert, but L. My name was Margaret. There was no L in my name, no L in our story. I sat down heavily in the driver's seat, the bracelet dangling from my shaking fingers. Who was L? The question echoed in my mind, demanding an answer I was terrified to discover. Maybe it was a gift for our daughter Jennifer, though her name started with J. Maybe it was for Eleanor, Robert's mother, though that seemed unlikely given the romantic inscription. I was grasping at straws, desperate for any explanation that didn't shatter my world. That evening, after Robert had gone to bed, I couldn't sleep. The bracelet haunted me, hidden now in my dresser drawer where I had carefully placed it. At 2 in the morning, I crept downstairs to our home office. We shared a computer, something we had always done because we had nothing to hide from each other, or so I had believed. I opened Robert's email account. The password was the same one we had used for years, our wedding anniversary. As the inbox loaded, my eyes scanned the names of senders. Most were work-related, routine correspondence about tax documents and client accounts. But then I saw it. Multiple emails from someone named Laura Peterson. The most recent was from just 3 days ago. My hand hovered over the mouse, terrified to click, but unable to stop myself. I opened the first email and read, "Robert, I can't wait to see you Thursday. Every moment away from you feels like an eternity. You make me feel alive again in ways I never thought possible. I love you more than words can say. Forever yours, Laura." I felt like I had been punched in the stomach. The room seemed to tilt around me. I clicked on another email, then another. There were dozens of them, going back 3 years. 3 years of, "I love you," and "I miss you," and "When can we meet again?" There were photographs attached, Robert and a beautiful woman with dark hair and a bright smile, sitting at restaurants I didn't recognize, walking on a beach somewhere tropical, laughing together with an ease and joy that felt like a knife twisting in my chest. I opened our bank account next, my hands shaking so badly I could barely type. There they were, monthly transfers of $500 to an account I had never seen before. Regular as clockwork, going back 3 years, the same 3 years as the emails. Robert had been systematically taking our money, money I had helped earn, money we had saved together, and giving it to another woman. The evidence was overwhelming, undeniable, devastating. There was no more room for doubt or explanations. My husband of 42 years was living a double life, and I had been blind to it until this moment. I sat in the dark office, staring at the glowing computer screen, and felt my entire world crumbling into dust around me. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the dark office until dawn broke through the windows, reading every single email, examining every photograph, tracing every bank transfer. By the time the sun rose, I had memorized the face of the woman who had stolen 3 years of my husband's heart. Laura Peterson. She looked to be in her mid-40s, beautiful in an effortless way I had never been, with long dark hair and a smile that radiated confidence. In the photos, Robert looked happier than I had seen him in decades. When Robert came downstairs that morning at his usual time, expecting his coffee and his newspaper, I was waiting for him at the kitchen table. The jewelry box sat in front of me, open and accusatory. Next to it, I had printed out several of the emails and bank statements. My hands were surprisingly steady as I watched him freeze in the doorway, his face draining of all color. "Who is Laura?" My voice came out cold and flat, nothing like my usual warm tone. Robert's mouth opened and closed several times before any words came out. "Margaret, I can explain. Please, just let me explain." He moved toward the table, but I held up my hand to stop him. 3 years, Robert. 3 years you've been living a double life while I ironed your shirts and made your dinner and cared for your mother. I picked up the bracelet, letting it dangle between us. R and L forever. How touching. Did you buy this with our money too? The money we saved together for our retirement? He sank into the chair across from me, his hands covering his face. When he finally looked up, there were tears in his eyes, but I felt nothing except a cold, burning rage. "I never meant to hurt you," he whispered. "It just happened." Laura and I met at an accounting conference in Philadelphia 3 years ago. We started talking, and she made me feel something I hadn't felt in so long. "And what was that?" I demanded, my voice rising now. "What could she possibly give you that I didn't?" "I gave you everything, Robert. Everything. I put you through graduate school. I raised your children. I took care of your dying father. I sacrificed my own dreams so you could have yours. What more did you want from me?" Robert looked at me with something that felt worse than hatred: pity. "You don't understand, Margaret. Laura makes me feel young again, important, alive. You and we stopped being husband and wife years ago. We became roommates just going through the motions. When was the last time we really talked about anything meaningful? When was the last time we laughed together?" His words felt like physical blows, each one landing with precision on the most vulnerable parts of my heart. "So this is my fault?" I asked, my voice shaking now. "I'm to blame because I was busy being a good wife and mother while you were out building a secret life?" "I'm not blaming you," he said quickly. "I'm just trying to explain. Margaret, I love her. I've been trying to figure out how to tell you. How to leave me," I finished for him. "After 42 years, you are planning to leave me for a woman half your age?" "She's not that young," he said defensively, and the absurdity of him defending her age in this moment made me want to scream. "I want you to tell me everything," I said, fighting to keep control. "Every detail. I deserve that much." But before Robert could say another word, his hand flew to his chest, his face contorted in pain, his breathing became labored and shallow. "Margaret," he gasped, "something's wrong. I can't—" He collapsed forward onto the table, knocking over his coffee mug. I screamed and grabbed the phone, dialing 911 with shaking hands. As I knelt beside my husband, watching him struggle for breath, I was torn between the instinct to save him and the fury that he was escaping this conversation. The paramedics arrived within minutes, but it was too late. Robert died in the ambulance on the way to the hospital, taking his explanations and apologies with him, leaving me drowning in a nightmare that had no resolution, only questions and pain. The funeral was held 4 days later, on a gray, rainy Thursday that matched the darkness in my soul. I moved through the preparations like a ghost, numb and disconnected from everything around me. My children flew in immediately. David from Chicago, Jennifer from Boston, Michael from Seattle. They held me, cried with me, and asked repeatedly if I was okay. I couldn't tell them the truth about their father yet. How could I destroy their grief with the knowledge that the man they were mourning had been a liar and a cheat? The church was packed with people from our community, colleagues from Robert's firm, distant relatives, and neighbors who had known us for decades. Everyone offered their condolences, telling me what a wonderful man Robert had been, how devoted he was to his family, what a tragic loss this was for everyone. Each word of praise felt like another small cut, deepening the wound that was already bleeding inside me. I stood at the front of the church in my black dress, accepting hugs and murmured sympathies when Eleanor approached me. Robert's mother was 78 years old, a woman I had cared for and respected for over 4 decades. I had nursed her through surgeries, brought her groceries every week, included her in every family celebration. I expected comfort from her, perhaps shared grief over losing the son and husband we both loved. Instead, she leaned close to me, her breath hot against my ear, and whispered words that turned my blood to ice. "You were never his real wife." Her voice was cold, venomous, filled with a contempt I had never heard from her before. Before I could process what she had said, she lifted one thin finger and pointed toward the back of the church. I followed her gesture and saw a woman standing partially hidden behind a large flower arrangement. It was Laura. She was dressed in black, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue, mourning my husband as if she had every right to be there. The sight of her at Robert's funeral, in the church where we had been married, where our children had been baptized, filled me with a rage so intense I could barely breathe. "What is she doing here?" I hissed at Eleanor, my voice shaking. Eleanor smiled, actually smiled with cruel satisfaction. "She has more right to be here than you do, Margaret. She was Robert's real love. You were just the housekeeper who happened to have a marriage certificate." Before I could respond, people were ushering us toward our seats for the service. I sat in the front pew with my children, my mind reeling, barely hearing the pastor's words about Robert's life and legacy. All I could think about was Eleanor's vicious whisper and Laura's presence in my church. The real devastation came after the burial when we gathered at the lawyer's office for the reading of Robert's will. My children and I sat on one side of the conference table. Eleanor sat on the other side with a smug expression that made my skin crawl. Robert's siblings were there as well, along with his longtime lawyer, Martin Jeffries, a man I had known for 20 years. Martin looked uncomfortable as he opened the folder containing Robert's will. He read through the standard provisions, small bequests to the children, some charitable donations, and then he paused. "There's a second document here," he said slowly, pulling out another envelope. "A codicil to the will, filed 2 months ago." My stomach dropped. 2 months ago was right around the time I had confronted Robert about Laura, right before his heart attack. Martin opened the envelope and began to read, his voice growing quieter with each word. "Robert Alexander Anderson hereby designates Laura Peterson as his life partner and equal beneficiary to all marital assets, including but not limited to the family home at 247 Maple Street, all savings and investment accounts, and retirement funds. All assets are to be split 50-50 between Margaret Anderson and Laura Peterson." The room erupted. My children jumped to their feet, shouting in disbelief. Robert's siblings looked shocked and confused. But Eleanor just sat there with that same satisfied smile, as if she had been expecting this all along. "That's not all," Martin continued, looking directly at me with sympathy in his eyes. "There's a note here indicating that Eleanor Anderson helped Robert establish several offshore accounts over the past 2 years, accounts that contain approximately $300,000 in marital assets that were transferred without Mrs. Anderson's knowledge or consent." I felt like the floor had disappeared beneath me. This wasn't just infidelity. This wasn't just betrayal. This was a calculated, systematic plan to strip me of everything I had worked for my entire adult life. And Robert's own mother had helped him do it. Eleanor finally spoke, her voice dripping with disdain. "You were always so naive, Margaret. Did you really think Robert was happy with you? You were convenient, that's all. Someone to cook and clean and take care of his parents while he built his career. Laura was his real partner, his intellectual equal. You were just the help who happened to share his last name." In that moment, sitting in the lawyer's office surrounded by the wreckage of my life, I realized that I hadn't just lost my husband. I had been deliberately and methodically erased by the 2 people I had trusted most in the world. That night, I returned to the house that suddenly felt like a museum of lies. My children wanted to stay with me, to comfort me and help me process the devastating revelations from the lawyer's office, but I sent them away. I needed to be alone with my grief, my rage, and the crushing weight of my own foolishness. They left reluctantly, making me promise to call if I needed anything, their faces etched with worry and their own anger at what their father had done. I walked through each room slowly, as if seeing it all for the first time. The living room where we had celebrated countless Christmases, the kitchen where I had prepared thousands of meals, the bedroom where we had slept side by side for 42 years. Every corner held a memory that now felt contaminated, poisoned by the knowledge that while I was building what I thought was our life, Robert was planning his escape to someone else. The photographs on the walls mocked me with their lies. Our wedding photo, Robert. looking handsome in his tuxedo, me in my white dress, both of us smiling with what I thought was genuine love and hope for the future. Had he ever really loved me? Or had I simply been convenient, a suitable wife to help him build the respectable life he wanted? Pictures of our children's births, their graduations, family vacations to the beach. Had Robert been genuinely present in any of those moments? Or had his mind always been somewhere else, waiting for something better to come along? I sank onto the couch and let the tears come. They poured out of me in violent, racking sobs that shook my entire body. I cried for the young woman I had been at 25, so full of love and trust, believing that devotion and sacrifice were the currency of a lasting marriage. I cried for all the years I had spent being the perfect wife, thinking that if I just tried hard enough, gave enough, loved enough, I would be valued and cherished. The memories flooded back, each one now tainted with bitter irony. I remembered working 2 jobs while Robert finished his graduate degree, coming home exhausted at midnight to find him asleep with his textbooks scattered around him. I would cover him with a blanket and kiss his forehead, feeling proud that I was helping him achieve his dreams. I remembered giving up my own plans to become a teacher because we couldn't afford childcare and Robert's career had to come first. Just for a few years, he had promised. Once I'm established, you can go back to school. That had been 40 years ago. I thought about all the times I had cared for his parents. His father's stroke had been particularly difficult. 3 years of round-the-clock care, changing adult diapers, feeding him through a straw, watching a proud man slowly lose his dignity. Robert had rarely helped, always too busy with work, leaving me to shoulder the burden alone. "You're so much better at this than I am," he would say. "Dad's lucky to have you." I had believed him. I had worn my exhaustion like a badge of honor, proof of my dedication to our family, and Eleanor. God, Eleanor. I had bent over backward to please that woman for decades. Every Sunday dinner prepared exactly to her specifications. Every holiday celebrated according to her traditions. Every criticism accepted with a smile and a promise to do better. I had brought her groceries, driven her to doctor's appointments, sat with her through lonely afternoons when Robert was too busy to visit his own mother. And all that time, she had been helping him steal from me, helping him plan a future that didn't include me. The worst part wasn't even the infidelity or the financial betrayal. It was the realization that I had been invisible to them. Eleanor had called me the help, and she was right. That's exactly how they had seen me. Not as a beloved wife, daughter-in-law, or partner, but as free labor. Someone whose contributions were expected and taken for granted. Someone so insignificant that they could plot her destruction without a second thought. I looked down at my hands, wrinkled and age-spotted. Hands that had worked tirelessly for more than 4 decades. What did I have to show for all that work? A house that was about to be split with my husband's mistress, retirement savings that had been siphoned into offshore accounts, children who were devastated by their father's betrayal, and a mother-in-law who despised me. At 67 years old, I felt like I had wasted my entire adult life on people who saw me as disposable. The pain of that realization was suffocating, pressing down on my chest until I could barely breathe. I curled up on the couch, hugging a pillow to my chest, and cried until I had no tears left. The house was dark and silent around me, as empty and hollow as I felt inside. But somewhere deep beneath the grief and despair, in a place I couldn't quite access yet, something else was stirring. A small ember of anger, barely glowing, waiting to catch fire. On the 3rd morning after the funeral, I woke up different. The crying had stopped. My eyes were swollen and dry, my throat raw from sobbing, but something fundamental had shifted inside me during the night. I walked to the bathroom mirror and stared at my reflection, really looked at myself for the first time in days. I saw a 67-year-old woman with gray hair and tired eyes, but I also saw something else, a survivor. This woman staring back at me had survived childbirth 3 times. She had survived working 2 jobs while raising young children. She had survived nursing dying parents through their final days. She had survived financial struggles, health scares, family conflicts, and countless challenges over nearly 7 decades of life. Robert and Eleanor thought they could break me, discard me like I was nothing more than trash to be thrown away. They were wrong. I thought about my grandmother, a woman who had fled an abusive husband in the 1940s when divorce was scandalous and women had few rights. She had raised 4 children alone, working as a seamstress and cleaning houses to keep food on the table. She had taught me that women in our family were made of steel, wrapped in softness, that we could endure anything and still stand tall. I had forgotten that lesson somewhere along the way, but I remembered it now. I picked up my phone and called my daughter Jennifer. She answered on the first ring, her voice thick with worry. "Mom, are you okay? I've been so worried about you." "Jennifer," I said, my voice steady and clear. "I need your help. I'm going to fight this. Your father doesn't get to rewrite history and steal my future, and neither does your grandmother." There was a pause. Then Jennifer's voice came back stronger, filled with fierce determination. "Thank God, I was hoping you'd say that. Mom, I've been doing some research. I'm a paralegal, remember? I know people. There are laws against what Dad and Grandma did. We can fight this." For the first time in days, I felt a spark of hope. "Tell me what we need to do. First, we document everything, every bank statement, every email you can access, every receipt, every piece of evidence that shows what Dad did. Second, we hire the best damn lawyer we can find. I know someone. Patricia Chen. She's a shark, Mom. She specializes in estate fraud, and she doesn't lose." I spent the rest of that day methodically going through every document in our home office. I printed bank statements showing the unauthorized transfers. I saved every email between Robert and Laura to a flash drive. I photographed the bracelet and kept every receipt I could find. I made copies of everything and stored them in 3 different locations. One set with Jennifer, one in a safe deposit box at the bank, and one hidden in the house where no one would think to look. Jennifer arranged a meeting with Patricia Chen for the following Monday. Patricia's office was in downtown Philadelphia, on the 20th floor of a gleaming glass building that intimidated me the moment I walked in. But Patricia herself was surprisingly warm, a woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and an even sharper mind. She listened to my story without interruption, taking notes occasionally, her expression growing more focused as I detailed every aspect of Robert's betrayal and Eleanor's involvement. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair and smiled, but it wasn't a kind smile. It was the smile of a predator who had just spotted prey. "Mrs. Anderson," she said, "they made several critical mistakes. First, that codicil wasn't properly witnessed according to Pennsylvania law. 2 witnesses are required for legal documents like that, and from what you've described, there's no indication that requirement was met. Second, the offshore accounts were funded with marital assets that legally required your signature for large transfers. If your husband forged your signature, that's identity theft and fraud. Third, if Eleanor knowingly participated in hiding marital assets, that's conspiracy to commit fraud." My heart began to beat faster. "So we can fight this?" "Fight it?" Patricia's smile widened. "Mrs. Anderson, we're going to destroy them. They thought they were clever, but they left a trail of evidence that any competent lawyer can follow. By the time I'm done, not only will you keep everything that's rightfully yours, but they'll face legal consequences for what they've done." She outlined a strategy that was both brilliant and ruthless. We would file motions to invalidate the codicil based on procedural irregularities. We would launch a fraud investigation into the offshore accounts and the forged signatures. We would subpoena Laura's financial records to prove she knew the money she received was obtained illegally. We would gather testimony from anyone who had witnessed Robert and Laura's relationship or heard them discuss their plans. "There's one more thing," Patricia said, her eyes gleaming. "We're going to request a meeting with Eleanor, Laura, and their lawyer under the pretense of negotiating a settlement. But we're not going to settle. We're going to expose everything they've done in front of witnesses, with a court reporter present to document every word. Sometimes the best revenge isn't just winning in court, it's making sure everyone knows exactly what kind of people they really are." I left Patricia's office feeling something I hadn't felt in months: powerful. For 42 years, I had been passive, accommodating, always putting others first. But those days were over. Robert and Eleanor had declared war on me, and they were about to learn that the quiet, gentle woman they had underestimated was capable of fighting back harder than they ever imagined. Patricia Chen moved with the precision and speed of someone who had done this 1,000 times before. Within 48 hours of our initial meeting, she had filed preliminary motions with the court and begun the process of freezing all assets until the investigation was complete. Robert's accounts, the offshore accounts, even Eleanor's personal accounts. Everything was locked down. They couldn't touch a single dollar until the court sorted out what belonged to whom. The first document Patricia uncovered was explosive. Robert's codicil, the one that supposedly gave Laura half of everything, had only one witness signature instead of the legally required two. Even more damning, that single witness was Eleanor herself, which created a massive conflict of interest since she stood to benefit from helping Robert hide assets. Pennsylvania law was crystal clear. The document was invalid. Patricia filed a motion to throw it out entirely, and the judge granted a preliminary hearing. But Patricia wasn't satisfied with just invalidating the codicil. She wanted to prove fraud, which carried criminal penalties. She hired a forensic accountant named David Roth, a meticulous man in his 60s who specialized in uncovering financial crimes. David spent 2 weeks analyzing every transaction in our joint accounts for the past 5 years. What he found was staggering. Robert hadn't just transferred $500 a month to Laura. He had made dozens of large withdrawals, 10,000 here, 15,000 there, always just below the reporting threshold that would trigger automatic bank notifications. The signatures on the withdrawal slips were supposedly mine, but David brought in a handwriting expert who confirmed within minutes that they were crude forgeries. Robert had literally been stealing my identity to fund his affair. The offshore accounts were even worse. Eleanor had helped Robert open accounts in the Cayman Islands using a shell corporation. They had transferred over $300,000 of marital assets into these accounts, money that was meant to secure our retirement. Patricia immediately reported this to the IRS and the Pennsylvania Attorney General's office. Tax evasion and money laundering were federal crimes that carried serious prison time. Then Patricia did something brilliant. She hired a private investigator to interview people in Laura's life, her neighbors, her coworkers, friends from her gym. What we discovered was that Laura hadn't been some innocent woman who fell in love with a married man. She'd been quite open about her intentions. Multiple witnesses were willing to testify that Laura had bragged about landing a rich older man and that she just had to wait for him to get rid of his old wife. She had told her sister that Robert promised her the house, the savings, everything, that it was just a matter of time. One neighbor provided a recording from a backyard barbecue where Laura, after several glasses of wine, had laughed and said, "Why would I date someone my own age when I can have a man who's already established? Robert's going to leave Margaret any day now. She doesn't even know what's coming." The recording was damning, proof that Laura knew exactly what she was doing and had actively participated in a scheme to defraud me. Patricia compiled everything into a case file that was 3 inches thick. Bank statements with forged signatures, email exchanges discussing how to hide money from me, witness statements from Laura's friends, the recording, photographs of Robert and Laura on expensive trips paid for with our retirement savings. Every piece formed a devastating mosaic of betrayal and criminal conspiracy. Now came the most delicious part of Patricia's plan. She contacted Eleanor's lawyer and proposed a settlement meeting. "Let's try to resolve this amicably," she had said in her most reasonable voice. "Mrs. Anderson doesn't want a long, drawn-out court battle. Perhaps we can find a middle ground that works for everyone." Eleanor's lawyer, eager to avoid public scrutiny of his client's actions, agreed immediately. Patricia scheduled the meeting for the following Thursday at her office conference room. But this wasn't going to be a negotiation. It was going to be an ambush. Patricia arranged for a court reporter to be present, which was standard for settlement discussions. What Eleanor and Laura didn't know was that Patricia had also invited several of Robert's siblings, cousins, and other family members under the guise of mediating family concerns. She wanted a full audience for what was about to happen. The night before the meeting, Patricia and I rehearsed everything. She showed me exactly which documents to present and in what order for maximum impact. She taught me how to stay calm and controlled, even when Eleanor and Laura tried to provoke me. "Your dignity is your weapon," Patricia explained. "Let them be emotional and defensive. You be the voice of cold, irrefutable truth." I went home that night and laid out my outfit for the next day. A navy blue suit that made me look professional and serious. Pearls that had been my grandmother's, sensible heels. Looked at myself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. This wasn't the soft, accommodating Margaret who had spent decades trying to please everyone. This was someone new. Someone who had been forged in fire and betrayal and had emerged as steel. Tomorrow, Eleanor and Laura would learn that underestimating me was the biggest mistake they had ever made. Thursday morning arrived with crisp autumn air and brilliant sunshine, the kind of perfect day that felt almost mocking given what was about to unfold. I dressed carefully in my navy suit, fastening my grandmother's pearls around my neck with steady hands. Looking in the mirror, I saw a woman who had been transformed by pain into something harder, sharper, unbreakable. My children had all flown back into town for this meeting, determined to stand beside me. Their presence gave me strength. We arrived at Patricia's office at exactly 10 o'clock. The conference room was large and imposing, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Philadelphia skyline. A long mahogany table dominated the center of the room, surrounded by leather chairs. Patricia had arranged the seating strategically, my children and I on one side with Patricia at the head. Across from us, empty chairs waited for Eleanor, Laura, and their attorney. The other family members began filing in. Robert's younger brother, Thomas, and his wife, Robert's sister, Carolyn, two of his cousins, and even his elderly uncle Frank, who had driven up from Baltimore. They looked confused about why they had been summoned, but Patricia had assured them this concerned important family matters regarding Robert's estate. They took seats along the sides of the room, creating an audience I knew Eleanor hadn't anticipated. At 10:15, Eleanor made her entrance. She walked in with her head held high, dressed in an expensive black pantsuit, exuding the confidence of someone who believed she had already won. Behind her came Laura, looking considerably less certain. Laura was beautiful even in her nervousness, wearing a gray dress and minimal makeup, her dark hair pulled back in a sleek ponytail. She wouldn't meet my eyes. Their attorney, a middle-aged man named Harrison Webb, carried a briefcase and wore an expression of professional boredom. Eleanor's confidence faltered slightly when she saw the crowded room. "What is all this?" she demanded, gesturing at the assembled family members. "I thought this was a private settlement discussion." Patricia smiled coolly. "These are family members who have a vested interest in Robert's estate and the truth about what happened. They have every right to be here. Please sit down." Her tone made it clear this wasn't a request. Eleanor exchanged a glance with Harrison Webb, who shrugged and took his seat. Laura slid into the chair next to Eleanor, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. I could see her leg bouncing nervously under the table. Good. She should be nervous. The court reporter, a professional-looking woman in her 30s, sat in the corner with her stenography machine, fingers poised and ready. Patricia had arranged for every word spoken in this room to be recorded and legally documented. There would be no denying anything that happened here. Patricia began with false pleasantness. Thank you all for coming. Mrs. Anderson has asked for this meeting to discuss the settlement of her late husband's estate. Eleanor Laura, we appreciate your willingness to negotiate in good faith. Eleanor leaned forward, that familiar smugness creeping back into her expression. Let's not waste time with pleasantries, Ms. Chen. We all know why we're here. Robert's wishes were clear in his codicil. Laura is entitled to half of the marital assets. Margaret needs to accept reality and stop dragging this out. It's embarrassing for everyone. Robert's brother Thomas frowned, looking between Eleanor and me with growing confusion. What codicil? What's she talking about? All in good time, Patricia said smoothly. She placed a thick folder on the table in front of her, resting her hand on top of it like a dealer about to reveal a winning hand. Before we discuss any settlement, there are some facts that need to be established. Mrs. Anderson has new evidence that sheds considerable light on the situation. Laura shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Eleanor's jaw tightened, but she maintained her composure. What kind of evidence? I spoke for the first time, my voice steady and clear, surprising even myself with how calm I sounded. Evidence that proves you and Robert systematically defrauded me for 3 years. Evidence that proves you helped him steal hundreds of thousands of dollars from our marital accounts. Evidence that proves you both committed multiple felonies. The room went completely silent. Robert's family members stared at Eleanor in shock. Harrison Webb sat up straighter, suddenly very alert. Laura's face drained of all color. Eleanor recovered quickly, forcing a harsh laugh. That's absurd. You're making wild accusations because you can't accept that Robert loved someone else. This is desperate and pathetic, Margaret. Patricia's smile widened, and I recognized it as the expression of a predator closing in for the kill. Is it? Let's examine the evidence, shall we? I think everyone here deserves to know the truth about what Robert, Eleanor, and Laura have been doing. She opened the folder slowly, deliberately, savoring the moment. Mrs. Anderson, would you like to begin? I reached for the first document in the stack in front of me, and as my fingers touched the paper, I felt a surge of power, unlike anything I had ever experienced. For 42 years, I had been silent, accommodating, invisible. Not anymore. Today, the truth would be heard, and justice would finally be served. The reckoning had begun. I pulled out the first set of documents, my hands completely steady now. These were bank statements from our joint savings account, covered in yellow highlighter marks. I slid copies across the table to Eleanor, Laura, and their attorney, then held up my own copy so everyone in the room could see. These are withdrawal slips from our joint account over the past 3 years, I said clearly, making eye contact with each family member in the room. They show regular withdrawals totaling over $200,000. Each slip has my signature authorizing the withdrawal. I paused for effect, except I never signed any of them. Harrison Webb leaned forward, examining the documents with sudden intensity. Eleanor's face remained impassive, but I saw her hands clench beneath the table. Patricia stood and walked around the table, placing additional documents in front of Robert's siblings and family members. We had a forensic handwriting expert examine these signatures. His report confirms that every single one is a forgery. Robert Anderson was committing identity theft against his own wife, systematically stealing from their joint account to fund his affair with Ms. Peterson. That's not, Laura started, but Patricia cut her off with a raised hand. We're not finished. Mrs. Anderson, would you like to share the next piece of evidence? I pulled out printed emails, the correspondence between Robert and Laura that I had discovered that terrible night. My voice didn't waver as I read selected excerpts aloud. From Robert to Laura, dated June 15th. I transferred another $10,000 today. Margaret doesn't check the accounts closely. She trusts me completely. We're almost at our goal. I looked up at Laura, whose face was now bright red. From Laura to Robert, dated August 3rd. I can't wait until you finally leave that old woman. Then we can get married and I'll finally get the life I deserve." Gasps filled the room. Robert's sister Caroline put her hand over her mouth in horror. His brother Thomas looked at Eleanor with disgust. "Mother, did you know about this?" Eleanor's composure was beginning to crack. Robert was unhappy. He had every right to commit fraud? Patricia interrupted sharply. "Let's talk about your role in this, Eleanor. Mrs. Anderson, the offshore accounts, please." I pulled out the documentation that David Roth, our forensic accountant, had uncovered. Eleanor helped Robert open 3 separate offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands under a shell corporation called Anderson Holdings Limited. Over the past 2 years, they transferred $314,000 of marital assets into these accounts, money that belonged to both Robert and me, hidden without my knowledge or consent. The room erupted in chaos. Robert's family members began shouting questions at Eleanor, their voices overlapping in anger and disbelief. Harrison Webb was frantically flipping through documents, his professional composure completely shattered. Laura had started crying, her hands covering her face. "That's not all," Patricia said, her voice cutting through the noise like a knife. Everyone fell silent. "We also have testimony from multiple witnesses who heard Ms. Peterson discuss her plan to land a rich older man and help him get rid of his old wife." One witness recorded a conversation at a party where Ms. Peterson bragged about the house and money she would inherit once Robert divorced Margaret. Patricia played the audio recording, and Laura's voice filled the room, slightly slurred from alcohol but perfectly clear. "Why would I date someone my own age when I can have a man who's already established? Robert's going to leave Margaret any day now. She doesn't even know what's coming. The house alone is worth $500,000. Laura jumped to her feet, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "I didn't mean it like that. I loved Robert. This is being taken out of context." "Sit down, Miss Peterson," Patricia commanded coldly. "We have 17 more witness statements that say otherwise. You actively participated in a conspiracy to defraud Mrs. Anderson of her marital assets. You accepted gifts and money that you knew were obtained through identity theft and fraud." I pulled out the final piece of evidence, the jewelry box with the bracelet inscribed R&L Forever. I held it up so everyone could see. Robert bought this with $15,000 withdrawn from our retirement account. My retirement account, money I had earned working 2 jobs to put him through graduate school 40 years ago. The devastation on Robert's family members' faces was absolute. His Uncle Frank, a retired judge, stood up with fury in his eyes. "Eleanor, how could you do this? Margaret has been nothing but devoted to this family for over 40 years. She cared for your husband until his last breath. She raised your grandchildren, and this is how you repay her?" Eleanor finally exploded, her mask of superiority crumbling completely. She was boring. She was old and boring and made Robert miserable. Laura made him happy. He deserved to be happy. "By stealing," Caroline shouted at her mother. "By committing crimes? Mother, what you did is illegal." Patricia let the chaos continue for a moment before delivering the final blow. "There's one more thing everyone should know. I've already submitted all of this evidence to the Pennsylvania Attorney General's office and the IRS. Eleanor Anderson and Laura Peterson are currently under investigation for conspiracy to commit fraud, money laundering, tax evasion, and identity theft. These are federal crimes that carry prison sentences of up to 20 years. The blood drained from Eleanor's face. Laura collapsed back into her chair, sobbing uncontrollably. Harrison Webb closed his briefcase and stood up. "I'm withdrawing as counsel, effective immediately. You should both contact criminal defense attorneys." He walked out without another word, leaving Eleanor and Laura sitting in stunned silence as the full weight of their situation crashed down on them. The legal proceedings moved swiftly after that devastating meeting. Within 2 weeks, the court had officially invalidated Robert's codicil on the grounds of improper witnessing and procedural violations. The judge ruled that Laura Peterson had no legal claim to any marital assets and ordered her to return every gift Robert had given her during their affair. The jewelry, designer handbags, expensive electronics, and even the furniture Robert had bought for her apartment. Everything had to be surrendered. Laura complied without fighting, her criminal defense attorney advising her that cooperation might lead to a more lenient sentence. I watched as delivery trucks brought boxes to my house containing items Robert had purchased with our money. Each box felt like a small victory, tangible proof that justice was being served. I donated most of it to charity. I didn't want anything that reminded me of their betrayal cluttering my fresh start. The offshore accounts were the most satisfying resolution. The forensic accountant traced every dollar, and the court ordered the full $314,000 returned to me, plus interest and penalties. Eleanor was forced to liquidate her own retirement savings to cover her share of the penalties, effectively wiping out the nest egg she had carefully built over decades. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The woman who had helped steal my retirement had destroyed her own in the process. The criminal charges were substantial. The Pennsylvania Attorney General prosecuted Eleanor for conspiracy to commit fraud, money laundering, and aiding identity theft. At 78 years old, she avoided prison time due to her age and health, but she was sentenced to 5 years of probation, ordered to pay over $200,000 in fines and restitution, and required to perform 500 hours of community service. The judge's words during sentencing were scathing. You betrayed not just your daughter-in-law, but every principle of family and decency. You will spend your remaining years paying for your greed. Laura Peterson received a harsher sentence. At 46, she had no sympathy from the court. She was found guilty of conspiracy to commit fraud and receiving stolen property. She was sentenced to 18 months in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised release. Her career as a marketing executive was destroyed. No company would hire her with a fraud conviction on her record. The last I heard, she had moved to another state after her release, trying to rebuild her life in anonymity. But the legal victories, as satisfying as they were, paled in comparison to what happened within my family and community. Robert's siblings and extended family rallied around me with an outpouring of support I hadn't expected. Caroline apologized repeatedly for not seeing what her mother and brother had been doing. Thomas helped me refinance the house to remove Robert's name from all documents, making it truly mine alone. Uncle Frank, the retired judge, became a regular visitor, taking me to lunch and treating me with the respect and dignity that Robert never had. My children were transformed by the ordeal. They saw their father's betrayal clearly and chose to honor my strength rather than his memory. Jennifer helped me set up new financial accounts with multiple safeguards to protect against future fraud. David flew in every month to check on me and help with house repairs and projects. Michael brought my grandchildren to visit more frequently, determined that they would know their grandmother as the strong, courageous woman she truly was, not the doormat their grandfather had treated me as. The community response was equally powerful. When word spread through our small town about what Robert and Eleanor had done, the social consequences were swift and severe. Eleanor, who had always prided herself on her standing in the community, found herself ostracized. Her church friends stopped calling. Her invitations to social events dried up. The garden club she had belonged to for 30 years quietly asked her to resign. She had built her reputation on being a respectable, moral pillar of the community, and watching it crumble was perhaps more painful to her than any legal penalty. As for me, I experienced something unexpected. I became a symbol of resilience. Women from the church, the community center, even strangers who heard my story began reaching out to share their own experiences of betrayal and finding the courage to fight back. I started attending a support group for women rebuilding their lives after divorce or widowhood, and eventually, I began facilitating the meetings, helping other women find their own strength. I redecorated the house completely, erasing every trace of Robert and transforming it into a space that was entirely mine. I painted the walls in colors I loved, soft lavenders and warm creams that made me feel peaceful. I bought new furniture, joined a local art class, and discovered I had a talent for watercolor painting. I traveled to places I had always wanted to see: Italy, Ireland, the coast of Maine, sometimes alone, sometimes with my children or new friends from my support group. At 70 years old now, 3 years after Robert's death, I look back on that nightmare as the moment my real life began. I'm no longer defined by who I was married to or how well I served others. I'm defined by my own courage, my own choices, my own dreams. The house is paid off, my retirement is secure, and I wake up every morning in a home filled with peace instead of lies. Eleanor passed away last year. I didn't attend her funeral. Some people thought that was cruel, but I had given that woman 42 years of my life and forgiveness. I had nothing left to give her, not even my presence at her grave. My children attended out of obligation, but they kept their visit brief and returned home to me, where they belonged. Justice, I learned, isn't just about legal victories or financial restitution. It's about reclaiming your dignity, rebuilding your life on your own terms, and refusing to let those who betrayed you define your story. Robert and Eleanor tried to erase me, but instead they freed me to become someone stronger than I ever imagined I could be. As I sit here today at 70 years old, looking out at the garden I've replanted with flowers I chose myself, I often reflect on the journey that brought me to this moment of peace. 3 years ago, I was standing at my husband's funeral, hearing his mother tell me I was never his real wife, discovering that the man I had devoted my entire adult life to had been systematically erasing me. That day felt like the end of everything, but it wasn't an ending at all. It was the beginning of my real life. For 42 years, I had defined myself through sacrifice and service to others. I believed that being a good wife meant putting everyone else's needs before my own, that love meant giving until there was nothing left of yourself. I thought that if I just tried harder, loved more selflessly, and asked for nothing in return, I would earn the devotion and respect I craved. I was wrong. What I earned instead was being taken for granted, being seen as disposable, being considered so insignificant that my own husband and mother-in-law felt comfortable plotting my destruction. Robert and Eleanor taught me the hardest lesson of my life. Betrayal often wears the most familiar faces. The people we trust most deeply, the ones we sacrifice everything for, can sometimes be the very ones who hurt us the most profoundly. They taught me that love without respect is worthless, that loyalty without reciprocity is exploitation, and that family means absolutely nothing if it isn't built on a foundation of mutual honor and dignity. But they also taught me something far more valuable. They taught me that I was stronger than I ever imagined. At 67 years old, when most people would have simply accepted defeat and lived out their remaining years in bitterness and regret, I chose to fight. I discovered reserves of courage I didn't know existed. I learned that it's never too late to stand up for yourself, to demand justice, to refuse to be erased. Age doesn't make you weak or irrelevant. Experience, pain, and determination make you formidable. The greatest gift that came from this nightmare wasn't the money I recovered or the legal victories I won. It was discovering who I really am beneath all those years of playing the role I thought I was supposed to play. I'm not just someone's wife or mother or caretaker. I'm Margaret Anderson, a woman who paints watercolors, travels to foreign countries, facilitates support groups, and helps other women find their own strength. I'm a woman who laughs loudly, speaks her mind, and no longer apologizes for taking up space in the world. If I could go back and give advice to my younger self, the 25-year-old bride who thought devotion and sacrifice were the keys to a happy marriage, I would tell her this: love yourself first. Respect yourself enough to demand respect from others. Never sacrifice yourself to the point where people believe they can erase you. Your worth isn't determined by how much you give or how well you serve. Your worth is inherent, unchangeable, and yours to define. I would tell her that being kind doesn't mean being a doormat, that setting boundaries isn't selfish, it's essential, that protecting your own interests doesn't make you greedy or cold, it makes you smart, that the people who truly love you will ask you to diminish yourself to make them comfortable, and that sometimes the greatest act of self-love is walking away from people who don't value you, even if you've known them your entire life, even if they're family. The moral of my story is simple but powerful. Never let anyone convince you that your contributions don't matter or that your presence is optional. You are not background scenery in someone else's story. You are the author of your own life. Greed, betrayal, and deception may win temporary victories, but truth and justice have a way of catching up eventually. And when they do, the people who underestimated you will learn the most expensive lesson of their lives. Family should be a source of love and support, not a cover for manipulation and theft. Blood relation doesn't entitle anyone to abuse your trust or steal your future. Real family, the kind worth keeping, is built on mutual respect, honesty, and genuine care for each other's well-being. Anyone who doesn't meet that standard, no matter what they're called or how long you've known them, doesn't deserve a place in your life. To every woman watching this who has ever felt invisible, taken for granted, or treated as disposable, you are so much stronger than you know. Your years of experience aren't a weakness, they're your greatest asset. You've survived every challenge life has thrown at you so far, and you'll survive whatever comes next. Don't let anyone, not even those closest to you, make you doubt your own worth or convince you to accept less than you deserve. Now I want to hear from you. If you were in my situation, standing at that funeral and learning that your entire life had been built on lies, what would you have done? Would you have fought back like I did, or would you have chosen a different path? Have you ever experienced betrayal from someone you trusted completely? How did you find the strength to move forward? Share your thoughts and stories in the comments below. Your experience might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. If this story touched your heart, made you think, or gave you courage to face your own challenges, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. Click that like button to help this story reach more people who need to know they're not alone. And don't forget to subscribe to this channel for more real-life stories of courage, resilience, betrayal, and justice. Remember these final words because they might save your life someday. You are never too old to start over. You are never too weak to stand up for yourself. You are never too late to demand the respect and dignity you deserve. Your value doesn't decrease based on someone's inability to see your worth. And most importantly, you are the author of your own story, and no one else gets to write your ending. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for letting me share this journey with you. And thank you for reminding me, through your support and comments, that speaking truth and seeking justice matters. My hope is that somewhere, someone watching this will find the courage to fight for themselves the way I finally learned to fight for myself. Stand strong, demand better, never give up. You deserve a life filled with respect, dignity, and genuine love. Don't settle for anything less.